Observe an adult operating with this profile. They classify individuals in seconds, enforce boundaries instantly, and operate with zero regard for social compliance. Standard clinical observers typically evaluate these traits as indicators of emotional instability or antisocial pathology. This assumption fails to account for the subject's developmental trajectory. He moved from an early high-risk environment into a stable, protective role within the security profession. This profile represents a multi-layered cognitive system designed to detect threat, identify inconsistency, and evaluate intent. Standard psychological models often misread the abrasive output of this system because they lack a model for the high-efficiency architecture driving it. To truly understand this protector mindset, we must trace its construction from early childhood bedrock to adult execution. The system begins with a 4-layer architecture. At the base is survival calibration, the neurological adaptations required to stay alive in an unpredictable environment. Over time, the subject modifies this foundation by stacking moral, institutional, and executive frameworks on top of the original wiring. In this system, early foundational wiring is never erased, it is only filtered. Maturation is defined by an efficiency upgrade, where an automatic physical reaction is transformed into a controlled, precise deployment of force. Phase 1 begins in a childhood defined by unpredictable aggression. In this environment, hierarchy is fluid, and weakness invites exploitation. Chronic exposure causes amygdala sensitization, lowering the activation threshold to detect threats faster. Simultaneously, the HPA stress axis calibrates to a higher baseline, making readiness for confrontation the default. The prefrontal cortex adapts, physically reducing the pause time between stimulus and action. Within this context, aggression is an instrumental behavior shaped by outcomes. It is a tool for survival, not a symptom of instability. The subject develops fast dominance calibration, learning to instantly identify who challenges the hierarchy and who submits to it. Phase 1 outputs a system optimized for speed and control, though it lacks any internal regulation. At age 17, the system undergoes its first major restructuring when the subject adopts a religious framework and a structured belief system. Adopting abstract rules of right and wrong forces a cognitive reorganization. A new layer of moral filtering begins influencing the prefrontal cortex. Decision-making shifts from outcome-based to principle-based, acting as the first inhibitory pathway against the original survival loop. This introduces the NIA framework, intent-based perception. The subject moves from judging a person's behavior to evaluating the intent behind that behavior. This framework heightens the subject's sensitivity to hypocrisy and incongruence. He becomes specialized in detecting when hidden motives do not match outward actions. Base aggression remains in the system, but its label changes. It is now categorized as a liability when uncontrolled. This phase provides the first layer of self-imposed restraint, shifting the identity from a reactive survivor to an accountable individual. At age 18, the subject enters the military, introducing an external hierarchy and a strict chain of command. Through behavioral conditioning, the subject learns to rely on context-dependent behavior. Aggression is no longer a reaction, it is a goal-directed deployment. For most, external discipline forces internal adjustment. But because the subject possessed a moral framework, the military's external rules interlocked with his internal code. This integration results in controlled aggression encoding, operating in high-precision alignment. Repeated exposure to controlled stress provides essential stress inoculation, completely stabilizing the subject's physiological response even under the most extreme pressure. Military training also formalizes pattern recognition, teaching the subject to rapidly classify individuals against a behavioral baseline. Institutional discipline weaponizes the moral filter, shifting Phase 1 aggression from an automatic reaction into a precision tool. Following military service, the subject takes on the care of younger siblings and begins building a family. These demands for stability force an expansion of executive function. The prefrontal cortex must now prioritize long-term consistency over immediate response. High responsibility environments reward emotional stability and punish volatility, creating a feedback loop that reinforces control. To maintain a predictable environment for dependence, the subject utilizes emotional suppression. Outward expression decreases to ensure predictable behavior. The subject's primary identity consolidates into the protector role. Every action is now filtered through the mandate to maintain order and safety for others. This final layer subordinates the rapid response survival wiring to a long-term strategic orientation. In the adult security profession, these calibrated traits are highly rewarded. Hypervigilance and pattern detection become the subject's primary operational assets. The subject uses thin slice pattern recognition to classify threats by detecting micro-deviations against established behavioral baselines. A disconnect occurs when standard observers view this rapid intervention. Most people operate with a social harmony bias, which delays their judgment. While others rely on social buffering, this subject responds to subtle threat cues that most people fail to perceive. His lack of social compliance stems from a reliance on internal standards rather than a need for external validation. What is misread as unprovoked aggression is actually an immediate response to an anomaly, a highly calibrated reaction to data that socially buffered individuals simply miss. The survival wiring forged in childhood remains the engine of the entire system. We can track how the system architecture processes a single input: uncertainty. At age 17, uncertainty bypassed all executive controls, hitting the survival layer and resulting in an immediate physical confrontation. Today, that same uncertainty is processed sequentially through the responsibility, discipline, and moral layers. The system has become more efficient. The initial threat detection is now processed into rapid cognitive resolution. Adaptive hypervigilance represents a cognitive architecture built for survival and service. It is a system optimized to detect what others cannot.